We do not think the way the world thinks. The weapons of our warfare are not humankind. They are not as humanity does. And how does humanity do it? Up here. They reason their way. They call it common sense, or they call it intellect, or they call it wisdom. And Paul says, we don't exist merely on that plane. Oh, we exist on that plane. We have common sense and we use our brains and we go get educated and we read and we study and we wrestle, but we don't win spiritual battles up here. Amen. We don't. We have battlefields of the mind, but we don't conquer because we didn't become followers of Jesus because we were talked into it. We didn't become followers of Jesus because we were convinced through intellect or apologetics. See, I have no problem with scriptural apologetics. I don't get into it much. And apologetics is really the proof of these things in the past and whether they fall into historical timelines or literal timelines or mythological timelines. And there are people that do a brilliant job of Christian apologetics and Hebrew apologetics. I leave that to other people. I'm not all that fascinated by it because I'm not a follower of Jesus because I'm convinced in the historicity of Noah's Ark. Or I truly believe David dropped a giant with a rock and a slingshot. That makes me believe in Jesus. No, because I don't think intellect will keep you following Jesus. I think a revelation of Jesus and His love, something happens to you in the journey, that's transformative. That takes you from a mental assent to thinking about God to a spiritual assent of believing that something happened to you inside, believing that you had an experience. And this is why the experience of meeting Christ can never take a back seat to education. And it doesn't mean education's wrong or book smarts or wisdom or studying. None of that's wrong, but it doesn't save us. And it doesn't get us into and it doesn't keep us in the love of the Father. So Paul had all of it memorized. Didn't do him any good. He's highly moral. Didn't do him any good. He knew the scriptures. Didn't do him any good. What did him good was meeting Christ on the road to Damascus. He had to encounter Jesus. And so I think one of the mistakes we make is this feeling that we can argue people into the faith. That if we could just figure out how to prove creation and prove the stories of Genesis and prove the genealogy of Abraham and prove there was a real Jesus and prove that there was an empty tomb, then we would somehow convince the world of Christ. And folks, it doesn't work that way. Why? Because the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. We don't come to Christ through the same lens that we come into loving history or science, or civics, or politics, or economics, where we read and we listen and we wrestle and we work this out through experience. But we also don't need to be afraid of those things because they take a back seat to revelation. Let me say that again. All of that other stuff actually takes a back seat to revelation. How do we know? Because Paul said, I was a Hebrew of Hebrews and a Pharisee of Pharisees, and I could trace my blood lineage back to Abraham. And he says all of this to the church at Philippi. And then he concludes with, but I consider all of it dung for the excellency of knowing Jesus Christ. So everything I brought to the table that was good, smart, well wrestled, well thought out, memorized. He said it really didn't make me who I am. What made me who I am is meeting Christ and spending time with Jesus. And then in that, I realize that there's more than meets the eye. And there's more than just book smart. And there's more than just wisdom. And there's more than mere intelligence. But in that, I learned to follow Him. Now, let me try to separate this into a thought process that I've been working through for some time. There's the knowledge of the head and there's the knowledge of the heart. Okay? And in most of that's not like a religious thing or a spiritual, or even a Christianity thing. It's a lot of people consider that the difference in intellect and emotion. Because from a worldly standard, from a system of the world, we would say you have your smarts and you have your hearts. And your smarts are based on intelligence, wisdom, study, experience, life lessons, wrestlings, musings. This is based on how you feel. This is based on your emotion, your emotional stability. And in that, this loses in the system of the world. Because what we say is, oh, you just feel that way, but you know better. Through the system of the world, our brains are smarter than our hearts. That's kind of how we teach people. Like your heart is uneducated and naive. Your brain's smarter than that. Use your common sense. Think this through. Don't follow. I think we consider our heart less mature. Like, it's so enraged with emotion, it can't be trusted. Oh, you just feel that way, but when you get a little older, you'll see things differently. Hey, by the way, that's not some brilliant stroke of genius when you tell people that when you get older, you'll see things differently. How could you not? You've seen more. I mean, it's not a matter of you got smarter. I know people that got older that didn't get smarter. It doesn't have anything to do with I got older, therefore I got stuff figured out. Sometimes the only way you figured things out is everything you've ever tried didn't work. All you really know is 86 things that don't work. You still haven't figured out any that do. Are you smarter? Yes, by default. So it's not a stroke of genius. It's not as if a ray of light shone to show you that the heart loses to the head. I think through the lens of the world, through the system of man, we kind of feel as if the heart should take a back seat to the experience of the head. And I disagree, not in every single category, of course. I mean, there are times when we're following our emotions and we're not really paying attention to what's around us. But I think it's almost an attack against revelation. As if having a revelation of God's love, you're naive if you believe that. Because you should be trying to prove there's a God first. Don't tell me God loves you. You can't even prove to me there's a God. And we almost shirk back like we should stop talking about loving God and being loved by God because we can't prove whether or not Moses was a real person or not. And so we sort of, and this has happened to a lot of us in Christianity, is that somehow we have to shrink away to the revelatory experience of having met Christ, thinking that the heart following Jesus isn't nearly as well thought out as the mind that follows Jesus. And so what we have done is we've gotten scared of the mind in Christianity. We've gotten scared of intelligence, scared of questions. Don't ask questions because that'll throw people off that are weak in their faith. Don't have an open Q&A forum and let just anybody raise their hand and ask a question, because what if so-and-so down here, it doesn't really know if they follow the Lord or not, and then you ask this really deep question, and then they're down here going, ooh, I never thought about that, and you don't want to be the one that leads them away from the faith. I couldn't disagree with that it's not possible for me to disagree with that theory more, and let me tell you why. A faith that hasn't doubted isn't faith. Okay? If you haven't had some wrestlings where you didn't know the answer, you don't know what you believe. You just believe the last thing you heard. And until you wrestle out some maybes and some possibilities, then you don't have a faith, you just have some ideas. And you should never be scared of the mind and the intellect and intelligence and wrestling, because we didn't get saved because we figured stuff out. We gave our hearts to Christ because we had a revelation of who He is, a revelation of His love, and we follow that love. And then, if questions come in, you go, ooh, is that logical? Does that make sense? Does that line up with this? That's fine. Fire away. Because this never overtakes what happened in me, who I know He is at a deep place in my heart. So if I got 10 questions and all of them are challenging what my faith says, I'm all right. Don't worry. The challenge is okay. Faith can stand against the questions and stand with the questions. And if you haven't asked them, how do you know what you believe? Like, you believe something, but you've never questioned it. Is it a real belief?